Oh, there's Alan. Good morning, Alan.
Morning, guys.
Oh, that sounds like we're connected.
Okay, I hear Alan.
Yeah, I'm here. I've been having trouble with
Good
my
morning.
laptop.
We figured.
Rosanne, you'll let us know when we're live?
Good morning, all. We are live now.
Okay, good. My name is Ron Lalonde. I'm the chair of the audit committee. I'm going to call the meeting to order. We have quorum. In fact, we have 100% attendance. Perhaps, Kevin, can I ask you to do the land acknowledgement for us?
Certainly. We acknowledge the land we are standing on as the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll ask for any declarations of interest under the Conflict of Interest Act. Alan or Joanne, seeing none.
No conflict.
Okay, I will then ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting number 20 held on February 11th. And Kevin's going to conduct a recorded vote, so I will let you go ahead and do that, Kevin.
Okay, on a motion to approve the minutes from February 11th, 2020, Commissioner De Laurentiis,
Approved. Agree.
Commissioner Halsey,
Approved?
Chair Lalonde.
Approved.
The minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, let's start the meeting. Committee members, before I start, I'd like to remind you that this is a virtual meeting of the audit committee. It's an open meeting. It's being live streamed on the TTC YouTube channel. To those of you who are watching on that channel, welcome to this meeting. As we go through the meeting, I'll ask each of you verbally if you have any questions or wish to speak on any item or wish to move any motions, rather than going through the trouble of sending text messages or emails to register those things, since there's just the three of us. I will also go around to you individually on those things. If you have a motion that you'd like to make, you can actually email it to the address that you were provided, or you can simply write it down and you can read it out, and the clerk will transcribe it. We will be conducting recorded votes on all motions and staff recommendations, so it's important that you respond when your name is called, wave if you're having difficulty getting on the microphone. And lastly, I think you have contact information for troubleshooting. If that happens, please don't hesitate to use it. Okay, let's go through the order paper. There's 5 items on the agenda. I was going to propose that, given this is a relatively light agenda, that I hold each of the items to allow us to have a few comments and ask any questions or speak to the items that are deemed important, unless Joanne or Alan, you have any objection and would like to approve any of the items in advance.
It's Alan speaking. I've read items 1 through 4. I don't have any questions on them, and I'm fully supportive of them. I think most of them are items that they're important, but they're housekeeping.
Okay. Joanne, do you have any questions you'd like to ask on those items at this point?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, well, I'm going to propose that we hold 1, 2, and 3 in any case, because we do have the external auditors here, and I'd like to hear them speak to the audit, and I'd like to have the opportunity to ask them a question if we deem appropriate, or at least some open-ended questions. And I think number 3 is probably an easy thing to approve, but I think we should not approve it until we've approved items 1 and 2 as well. However, I'm quite open to receiving a motion to move item number 4. I agree that that's a fairly routine item. So, Alan, are you prepared to move that?
Yes, sir. I move it.
Okay, Kevin, could you please record the vote on that one?
Thank you. On a motion to receive item 4, Commissioner De Laurentiis,
Agree.
Commissioner Heisey,
Agreed?
Chair Lalonde.
Agreed.
Item 4 is received unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, and I think I'll hold number 5 in case we have any questions that we'd like to ask on that one as well. Okay, so given that, let's move to item 1, which is the audit results performed by PricewaterhouseCoopers. I know that we have the auditors here. Could we ask Terry to perhaps just introduce this item with some comments on the audit?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Terry McKinnon. I'm a partner at PwC. I will start with slide 4 of our PDF that was pre-circulated. Sorry, I don't know the number on your internal documents. The audit went very well. As you are probably aware, because of COVID, our audit was conducted completely remotely with our team members working from home. And TTC employees providing us with information electronically. We thankfully are very well set up to work remotely, in that we have technology available that we developed about 4 or 5 years ago. The key piece of technology that we used during the course of the audit was something called Connect, which you will see on slide 4. And as you can see at the bottom of it, there's the request that we asked for information from management, and there was over 500 requests for information. As you can imagine, this is a very complicated audit, and previously the audit was conducted on site, but management was very cooperative with us and provided us with all the information we needed electronically to finish our audit. And so as you can see on the slide for status of the audit, there's very little that's outstanding at this point in time, which is a good news story. The first item that we had there with the reconciliation of the City of Toronto confirmation, I can confirm to you that we have now received that information and there are no issues arising from it. So that item is cleared. The legal letters from the lawyers, we don't tend to follow up with them until closer to the approval of the financial statements. We're required to do it within 5 days of dating our opinions. So we will do that work at that point in time, but I can confirm to you that we have received legal letters from many lawyers, and there were no issues that we have noted as a result of, or nothing that management was not already aware of and we were aware of. And then the last 3 items, 3, 4, and 5, we do once the financial statements are approved. So those are expected to be outstanding at this point in time. So if I can continue on, I will now go to slide 6. So if you recall, during the audit plan meeting that I attended, there were significant risks that I had brought to your attention at that point in time that we were planning on addressing during the course of our audit. So this is communicating to you the work that we have done as a result. So in terms of the first one, the risk of material misstatement due to fraud in management override of controls, this is a significant risk for all audits, not just TTC, every single audit that we do. And so the work that we do there is outlined. I would say that the largest piece of work that we do to address this risk is in the 3rd bullet, in using our data analytics tool, Halo. And this is where we gather all of the journal entries that have been recorded by TTC management. And we use this analytics tool and apply risk criteria that we have identified where we think that risk may occur within the organization, and based on substantive work that we do. And we apply that risk criteria and have tested the journal entries, and there were no issues noted. So we found them to be reasonable and within operating parameters. So as a result of all that work that we did on this slide, there are no matters to bring to your attention. We were not either made aware or identified any fraud within TTC. The next slide is the risk of fraud and revenue recognition. So this is another significant risk in all entities. So this is looking at particular revenue streams of TTC and identifying and doing additional work with regards to fraud. So again, we've outlined the work that we have done there. And you can see there's a lot of work that we do with respect to the internal controls. And so we're looking at the Presto internal controls as well as just general cash internal controls. As cash is obtained and collected by various aspects of TTC's operations. And again, there was no issues that were noted as a result of the work that we did on revenue. The next slide is looking at critical accounting estimates. So these are estimates that are highly judgmental, significant in amount, and the work that we had performed around those. So in terms of employee benefit plans, these are significant liabilities on the financial statements of TTC. We utilize our actuaries to review the work that has been done by TTC's actuaries to make sure that the judgments and estimates that have been used are reasonable and in line with what we would expect. I'll highlight one particular item when we get to the slide, just a difference that we have noted. We also look at property and liability claims, and so these are self-insured as well as insured liabilities. And again, we use our actuaries and specialists to help us with assessing the reasonableness of those amounts. And again, as a result of the work that we have done over the estimates, we only found this one matter of 9.3 million that I'll highlight in the slide coming up. On the next slide is a large transaction, as you all are aware. It had significant impacts to the audit. And this is the rapid transit projects and the upload to the province. So the work that we had done around this was mainly having management provide us with their perspective on what the accounting impacts were of this upload. And we had reviewed the information, looked at the supporting documents. We had consulted with our specialists from a technical perspective, as well as liaised with the City of Toronto audit partner as well. And based on the conclusions that management reached, which was there was an accounting entry to remove these projects from the TTC's financial statements, and we concurred with that conclusion at the end of the work that we had done there. So that's kind of the major work that we did. Clearly, there's a lot of other auditing work that occurs, but those are the ones that we wanted to highlight to you. On slide 11 is the summary of unadjusted and adjusted differences. So what we had communicated to you before in terms of the materiality that we applied during the audit, it did change as a result of actual results. We estimated at that point in time based on forecasted results. So it moved from 50 million to 55 million, and we report anything over 10% of that amount. So there was this item related to past service costs, and this was a technical matter on how past service costs, these past service costs, are changes to the plans. So changes to the pension or the long-term liability or dental and medical liability plans. So there's a particular way that it is accounted for under the standards, which is a judgmental area with this particular one. TTC's viewpoint was on the past service costs and TTC's. So that was 9 million. So it wasn't adjusted in the financial statements because it's clearly not significant, but we just wanted to bring that to your attention. We've had a conversation with management, and it's something they're going to look at for future. Okay, on slide 13 is just a summary of the audit fees on the various different aspects. And there was clearly some incremental work that was done as a result of that subway upload, as well as some incremental work over SAP. On the next slide, slide 14, is required communications. I'd just like to highlight here a couple of things. We have included a couple of specific representations in the management representation letter relating to the project upload, as well as other significant provisions. Independence, we have included our letter in Appendix 3, and we do confirm that we are independent of TTC, and there's no items that have come to our attention to cause that to change. We did not find any significant internal control recommendations. There were some minor ones that we had discussed with management and shared with management that they can look at going forward, but there was nothing significant that came to our attention. And then in terms of fraud and illegal acts, as I mentioned, nothing has come to our attention. Through to the chair of this committee, we just want to make sure before we issue our opinion on the financial statements that nothing's been brought to your attention directly that we need to be made aware of before we issue our opinion.
Thanks, Terry. On behalf of the Audit Committee, I can assure you that we're not aware of any such issues that have been brought to our attention.
Great, thank you. In terms of other information, we do look at TTC's annual report, and that's just to make sure that any financial information that's reproduced in it is done accurately. So based on what we've read, there's been no instances of inconsistencies. I will skip now to slide 19. What we want to highlight here to you is just, the impact of COVID-19. It's what we call a subsequent event because it happened after the year end. So we wanted to understand what the impacts on TTC's financial statements were from the subsequent event. So clearly there's an impact on your operations as a result of the social distancing measures and quarantining that's happening. So what we have done is added a subsequent event note into the financial statements. And this outlines, the situation that has occurred subsequent to year end, and there's going to be an impact on TTC's operations, but at this point in time, and clearly because it's still going on, it cannot be quantified. So this is a note that's being put in 99% of our clients' financial statements who have a December year end. And it's quite frankly expected that you would see something on this particular matter in financial statements. So we can talk about that later in terms of what that note says. And there's also, I think, a reference in there too about the impacts potentially on workforce as a result of COVID-19. We also do look at, what's the impact on assets, valuation of assets on TTC's balance sheet, but we didn't see that there was any impact on, for example, accounts receivable or any other, long-term assets are still considered to be valued appropriately, et cetera. So that was the only one that we had highlighted there. And then just in the appendices, you'll see the examples of the example of the management representation letter, the independence letter, and our draft auditor's report is also included. You will see that it is unmodified, so it's exactly what you want, is an unmodified opinion. And then some information about COVID-19. So with that, perhaps I'll pause and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Terry. Joanne, do you have any questions?
I do have one question, but perhaps it's more to Josie than our colleagues at Pricewaterhouse, and it has to do with the upload work and the design work and the way that we've characterized the asset. So, question to Josie is: since the agreement with the province is still there seems to still be some details to work out. Do you foresee any opportunity where we could transmit the value of the work that we did to the province and thereby get some credit for it, or is it pretty much settled?
So through the chair, excuse me, those discussions are still ongoing. When the agreement with the city and the province was made, it was identified that the work that we had done previous to the upload had costs associated with that. And it was recognized as something that we still need to work through, and those discussions are still ongoing. So we are trying to recoup the costs that we had incurred at the time that we were responsible for it. So it's a matter of, just a matter of resolving that. But it was, we made sure that we had identified it at the time that we needed to get those funds back. So it is coming.
Okay, but for now,
Yeah.
for now, it's a prudent statement to say this is the amount that
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good, thank you.
Is that it, Joanne?
Yeah. So,
Alan, any questions?
Nope.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. First of all, for you, Terry, on the subsequent event issue, are you required as auditors to test for going concern ability given the materiality of the subsequent event?
Yes, we are. So it is part of the assessment that's done. With TTC, given it's a subsidiary of the City of Toronto, is financially supported by the City of Toronto. The presumption there is that the city will continue to support.
Now, you also audit, I don't know about you personally, but PwC also audits the City of Toronto. I presume that testing will take place for the city's financial statements as well?
That's correct. Their audit has been delayed, so I don't think it is starting until the end of June or July. So it is a different partner, by the way.
Right, okay. The more general questions I wanted to ask you are, can you comment, did you get the appropriate support and resources from TTC staff in conducting your audit?
Yes, full support. Like I said, it was a lot of work for them to upload and scan everything that we needed, but we received full cooperation from management.
Okay, that's great. And then finally, is there anything of a confidential nature that you would like to share with the committee that we should go in camera to discuss?
There's nothing that I have to bring.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. Okay, I had nothing else. And Alan and Joanne, if you had if you don't have anything to speak to, perhaps I could ask you, Joanne, to make a motion to approve the recommended items or recommendations on this item.
I will make that motion to approve.
Okay, and Kevin, if you could conduct the recorded vote.
Thank you. On the recommendations in item 1, Commissioner De Laurentiis, how do you vote?
I vote in favor.
Commissioner Heisey
In favor.
and Chair Lalonde. Thank you. Item 1 carries unanimously.
Okay, let's go to item 2, which is to consider the draft consolidated financial statements. And Josie, perhaps I'll ask you if there's any comments you'd like to make about the statements.
Yes, good morning. I'll just introduce them and then I'll take the lead from the committee, but I'd just like to first thank our partners at PwC. I'm not sure if you know, but this is the last year of their engagement with the TTC. So they've been with us, I believe, for about 10 years. So Terry, thank you, and all of your previous colleagues who have worked with us and in this particular year. There were some challenges, given COVID, but we all worked really well together to get to this point. And as you heard, the city still delayed, so we still, we were working with them as they were focusing in on COVID. So lots of challenges, but we worked through it all. So I'm very pleased to present the draft statements, and again, thank my team as well for all the work that they did to support Terry and her team. And so what you have before you today is the results of that, and what we're showing to you is essentially an accounting surplus of just about $486 million. Primary issue, of course, being on the capital asset side, the additions of some assets, and really the issue that I think Terry highlighted, which was the loss of assets due to the upload. So the really is the kind of the key change that we're seeing. But if you'd like a walkthrough, I'll leave it in the committee's hands. I have Alex Kassar, who is our director, who can walk through the highlights of this report. Otherwise, if you just would like to take, ask questions, we can take them. So I'll leave that in the committee's hands. So thank you.
Thanks, Josie. Alan, Joanne, would you like additional comments on the statements?
No.
Get just a couple of highlights.
Sure. Okay, let's go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Josie, and thank you, Chair. Just like to first echo Josie's comments and really thanking the staff, as was noted during Terry's presentation. Pulling together the TTC financial statements involves contributions from throughout the TTC. And so being able to get to this point that we are today on schedule, given COVID, I really want to thank all of the staff throughout the TTC, including the manager, Mayor Sharon Tippett, who led this process, and the supervisor, Angelette Lim. So thank you to everybody. It's my pleasure to kind of walk you through the financial statements. I'll spend the most time, I guess, on the statement of financial position and the statement of operations. So the statement of financial position summarizes the TTC's financial assets, liabilities, and non-financial assets. So in terms of the financial assets, that first section there, you'll note that the largest item is our subsidies receivable amount, about $1 billion. And later on, you'll see through note 5, that is broken down into two key components. There's a current portion, which is kind of the amounts that are approved through the annual budgets in terms of our cash flow in both our operating and capital. And so that current portion is $432 million this year. And then the second component of that amount is what we call other recoverable amounts. It totals $591 million and reflects the city's obligations related to long-term liabilities, such as our post-retirement medical and dental benefits. So we receive payments that we need on a cash basis each year, and the longer-term obligations are recorded in that other recoverable amounts line. So overall, subsidies receivable at the end of 2019 versus 2018 are about $130 million lower on the current portion. And those funds are largely reflected, as you'll note, in the higher cash balance, about $40 million higher this year, and in the lower accounts payable balance, which decreased by about $62 million. So basically, we draw our current subsidy as we need to fund our accounts payable and of course, to have some cash on hand. So now moving on to the next section, the liabilities. The largest balance there is the employee feature benefit liability. So there's 4 key items in there. There's the post-retirement medical and dental benefits, and also post-employment benefits related to WSIB and our long-term disability plan. So all those amounts, of course, there's lots of estimates that are involved in them. All the amounts are actually determined, and all the assumptions are noted in later on in the notes for those items. So, and then the other item that I'll draw your attention to in the liabilities are unsettled accident claims. Other than we have insurance for catastrophic cases over $5 million, but otherwise accident claims are self-insured through the TTC insurance company. So again, we involve actuaries to look at our cases and assess an estimate of the likely ultimate settle amounts for all cases that have been incurred up to December 31st, 2019. So when you take the financial assets and liabilities, the financial assets minus liabilities, you get to the net debt line, which is about $250 million. And that is largely reflective of a couple items within non-financial assets, primarily our supplies inventory. And there's a handful of capital assets for which we do not receive capital subsidy upon acquisition. Those are primarily our non-revenue vehicles and and certain IT assets. And so when it comes to those assets, we initially we obviously have to pay for those items upon acquisition, and then we're able to, when we charge them to expense, we then are able to get a subsidy reimbursement for them. So as we use those items is when we get the subsidy in those cases, and that's what generates the net debt that you see on this statement. Okay, so then within the non-financial assets category, obviously the biggest pieces are tangible capital assets number, about $12 billion. This represents our capital assets at historical cost, less of course the accumulated amortization over time, and then that leads you to the accumulated surplus, which is effectively, for most assets, we receive capital funding as we acquire the assets. That's recognized as revenue, and then the related expense happens over time as the assets are used and wear out. And given kind of where we are, that's the accumulated surplus number, about $12 billion, which again is primarily the tangible capital asset balance. Okay, so moving on to the statement of operations. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so our statement of operations incorporates both the operating capital results. You'll note the first section is around operating revenue. And those are all the captions be familiar through the operating budget and operating financial results. Obviously, our biggest piece there is our passenger revenue amount, close to $1.2 billion in 2019. Then after that is our subsidies. You see there, we include the full capital subsidies received in the year as part of our revenue for the statement. And then under the public sector standards, we need to present our expenses in accordance by service. So obviously for us, that's primarily conventional and Wheel-Trans. And so you'll note that total of about $3 billion. It's important to note in there that with the capital asset amortization, a little over $600 million, and then also the aforementioned charge of $239 million relating to the expansion upload. And I note the question earlier about reimbursement. So those discussions are ongoing through the city, but in our case, since we received the funds while during that construction time, the amount that would be reimbursed by the province would accrue to the city. So we are supporting that process, and we do hope to achieve some recovery. But for that purpose, it's why on the TTC statements itself, we can take the full charge this year as we've lost accounting control of that asset. So when you back out those two items, the amortization and the write-down, that total $3 billion expense becomes closer to the $2 billion number that I'd be more familiar with through the normal operating budget process. And then the difference between basically the capital subsidy revenue and the expenses associated with capital, being the depreciation and that write-down, you get to the surplus for the year, which is $485 million. Of course, those are not funds that are really available for us for any kind of use. It just represents the increased accounting value, if you will, of our capital assets on hand. Okay, so then after that are three additional statements. The first one being the statement of remeasurement gains and losses. So this statement reflects that the TTC uses some financial derivatives to manage exposure to fluctuating fuel prices. And so this statement presents the gains or losses as of December 31st resulting from those contracts. If we move to the next page, we have our statement of change in net debt. I explained net debt earlier, and this is basically just the changes in the net debt number presented by the various components. And then the final statement is a statement of cash flows. And this is just kind of showing from a cash perspective the different items that impact our cash balances over the course of the year. Then after the individual statements, there's of course all the notes disclosure they're required to make under the public sector standards. I'm just going to highlight a handful of them. Note 5 that I mentioned earlier, the subsidies receivable. As you can see, there's the two components, the current portion and the other recoverable amounts, which is primarily centered around our employee benefits, and also involves some items relating to things like construction holdback and some of our major capital projects, where technically the costs incurred, but we don't have to remit the funds right away. So basically, we will, as we end up having to pay those vendors, then we will ultimately make the subsidy claims to the city. And then moving on from there, maybe I'll highlight note 8 and 9. So note 8 is the unsettled accident claims, and note 9 is a quite extensive note on employee benefit liabilities, and it has all the disclosures there surrounding all of our assumptions relating to how the estimates for those liabilities are that flow into the assumptions that calculate those liabilities. Note 11 has our tangible capital assets by class, breaking down subways, rolling stock vehicles, etc. And then maybe I'll highlight one more. Note 15 has a breakdown of our expenditures by object. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in the statement of operations, we have to disclose it by service there. And here, perhaps in a way people might be more familiar with, expenses being listed, wages, materials, fuel. That provides that kind of different lens on our expenses through this note 15. Maybe if we just kind of wrap up, a reference was made to note 19 in the, actually here, we have the note 18, which lists our major contractual commitments. And then note 19 is a subsequent event note that was mentioned by Terry, where we're highlighting our significant decline in passenger revenue and noting that we are currently in receipt of operating of emergency funding from the City of Toronto. So the City of Toronto is providing us with funding in addition, of course, to our normal subsidies to make up for the shortfall that's being caused by the loss of passenger revenue. So that brings kind of my comments on the statement to conclusion, and I'm happy to take any questions to go over anything in more detail if it's required.
Thank you very much. Joanne, any follow-up questions?
Thank you for that review.
Okay, Alan?
Oh, thanks a lot.
I just had the one question, Josie, about the auditor. You mentioned this is the last year for Terry as our lead auditor. I assume that's a standard auditor rotation issue. And have we met the partner who will be taking over the audit responsibilities?
In fact, it's not just an audit rotation. We're actually, there's a new contract issued, and so we'll be working with a different firm starting next year.
I see. Has that been announced yet?
Alex, I don't know if it has been officially, has it?
I believe a report went to City Audit Committee.
Okay.
So it's KPMG will become the auditor for the city as a whole and all its entities.
Okay. I assume, Josie, at the appropriate time that will also need to be approved by this committee?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, we can, sorry, Kevin?
Sorry, I just want to clarify that City Council take out the contract on behalf of the agencies as well. It will not be coming to the TTC board. So the City Audit Committee approves it. It's the RFP, it goes to council for approval, but when you read the report, it's to conduct audit services on behalf of the city and its agencies and corporations. So it won't be coming to the TTC board for approval. Council undertake that on our behalf.
Right. Okay, fair enough. Terry, we'll miss you. Good luck in future endeavors.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure serving TTC, only for a year for me, but for the firm for 10 years. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, Alan, can I ask you to move approval of item number 2?
Yes, I'd be pleased to.
Yeah, item number 2, sorry.
I'd be pleased to.
Okay, Kevin?
I move.
A recorded vote, please, on the recommendations in item 2. Commissioner De Laurentiis, how do you vote?
I approve.
Commissioner Heisey?
Approve.
And Chair Lalonde?
Approve.
Item 2 carries unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, item 3, the draft annual report. Josie, is there anything that you'd like to add on that item that we haven't already discussed?
No, I have no further, nothing to add. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and I have no questions. Alan or Joanne, do you have any questions on this item?
Not me.
No questions.
Okay, Joanne, can I ask you to move approval of the recommendations on item 3?
I move approval on item 3.
Kevin?
On the recommendations in item 3, Commissioner De Laurentiis,
Approve.
Commissioner Heisey,
Approved?
and Chair Lalonde.
Approve.
Thank you. Item 3 carries unanimously.
Okay, let's move to item 5. Betty, I'd like to ask you if there are any comments that you'd like to make on this extensive report.
Yes, just a few comments. Can you all hear me?
Fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So just by way of background, on an annual basis, our safety executive conducts an annual review of our TTC safety management system. And really the purpose of this review is to ensure that it's continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. And it identifies opportunities for improvement, evaluates how well our safety management system is functioning to support the safety security cornerstone of TTC's corporate plan. And the review, what we do is look at a number of inputs, analysis of a number of inputs, and the period that we're looking at here, I know it's a bit stale, but it is an extensive process that we undertake. So we're looking at the period between Q4 2018 and Q3 2019, and we're looking at inputs like performance indicators, KPIs, audit assessment results, regulatory oversight, status of our safety and environment initiatives, and of course the group department management reviews as well. You might recall last year for the first time, we determined that this review should be presented annually to the Audit and Risk Management Committee, and we did that last year in May. And of course, then it went to the board to provide members with information on the functioning of TTC safety management system. And this is again about helping board members fulfill their legislative duties as corporate directors. And under legislation, you have prescribed duties to take all reasonable care to ensure that TTC complies with safety and environmental legislation and all regulatory orders. And as you know, at last year's Audit Risk Management Committee meeting, we also made the commitment to report to you going forward on compliance, on regulatory compliance. So we started including as part of the CEO's report, a table outlining, summarizing the status of regulatory orders. And again, this provides assurance that commissioners have discharged their legal responsibilities. So what you have in front of you is really a summary. So it's the final report. It summarizes the results of that review that we've undertaken. And it includes opportunities for improvement, as well as it gives rise to our 3-year safety and environment corporate goals and objectives. So what we're asking for is really for you to approve our approach to continuously improve the effectiveness of our safety, health, and environment management system, and of course receive this report along with the goals and objectives, the work plan, and forward it to the board for information. So be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Betty. Joanne, any questions of Betty?
I do have one. I note that on the first item, the occupational lost time injury rate, the second bullet under trends speaks to the fact that the emotional trauma injuries is the part that's going up and has gone up. And so there's a program, psychological health program, health and safety program developed in 2021. So the obvious question goes to the fact that with COVID-19, and when we come out the other side, if ever we do, it is likely to have led to even more of a psychological health and safety concern across the board. So how are you addressing that? And presumably you're reviewing what that program will look like and what it should look like.
So yes, we're always continuously improving and looking at existing programs and updating it as we go along. And to your point with respect to the COVID impact, it is definitely on top of mind for us, and we do receive incident reports, occupational injury reports, and that would highlight if there's any issues surrounding, emotional trauma. It would be documented that way, and we always would ask the organization and figure out ways to try to gather that information, and always ensure that we look at ways to address those issues, because it's definitely something that is top of mind for us.
Are we using an external supplier or expertise to help us develop this program?
Yes, actually, that's the plan, is to bring somebody in and to help us with that. There is a CSA standard specifically on psychological health and safety. So our expectation is for them to have a look at that and do a gap analysis first to see how we're doing in terms of whatever measures we have in place, how well we're meeting the standard in terms of that CSA standard for psychological health and safety.
Well, and then you'll probably ask them as well to assess whether does that standard even fit anymore. That standard would have been developed under more normal conditions. We're just in the middle of a pretty abnormal condition. So presumably the industry itself, the health and safety or psychological health and safety industry, will be doing some revision, some reassessment as to what it all means and how that gets translated into a program.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
No more questions, Chair.
Thank you, Joanne. Alan, any questions?
Yeah, I was intrigued by the term emotional trauma injury. And if you could just give me an example of what would constitute, a generic example, obviously, so I have a better understanding of how that term is defined.
Sure. So anything, for instance, if an operator is involved in a collision, that might incur an emotional trauma injury. Being witness to priority 1, a suicide event, would result in emotional trauma. So those are some examples of emotional trauma injuries.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, is that it, Alan?
Yes.
So Betty, the one question I had was, given the staggering loss of revenues that we've had and lower operating conditions, have we considered whether there are any items in our health and safety program that could be accelerated during this kind of operating period? Much as the city is accelerating a lot of their infrastructure work, are there things that we could accelerate?
Do you mean from a health and safety perspective?
Yes. Like, I'm wondering if there are any programs that are difficult to implement during normal operating conditions that might be easier to implement. For example, if it required any kind of closures, or I'm not sure if there are any such programs that we have, but I was wondering if that had been considered.
Well, I'm just looking at it from a health and safety perspective. I mean, we're pretty much at this point providing the same level of service or even more than we were prior to COVID. So it's hard for us to accelerate anything further. I mean, we've been very much involved in the response activities related to COVID right now. And in terms of all of our other existing work, like incident response that we do, our safety assurance activities, we're carrying on as we were prior to the pandemic. So I can't think of anything else that we could accelerate at this point. especially looking at the organization and what capacity we have to implement programs. To be honest with you, a lot of the work is COVID focused right now. So I can't think of anything specifically that we could accelerate at this time.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I didn't have any more questions. So Alan, could I ask you for a motion to approve the recommendations on this item?
Yep, motion to approve, thanks.
Kevin?
Thank you. On motion to adopt item number 5, Commissioner De Laurentiis,
Approve.
Commissioner Heisey,
Approve?
and Chair Lalonde.
Approve.
Thank you. Item 5 carries unanimously.
Okay, and Joanne, assuming that there is no other business, could I ask you for a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
Kevin?
Motion to adjourn. Commissioner De Laurentiis,
Agree.
Commissioner Heisey,
Agree?
Chair Lalonde.
Agreed.
Thank you, committee members, our partners at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and staff. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you, Kevin. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank you.
day.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.